Oh, hello. Hey, how are ya? Hello. Oh, hello, everybody, and welcome back to my channel. I'm Ryan LaSala, local fantasy author, Pisces sun and moon, charity case, manic pixie dream Guido, and the inspiring host of Mysterious Writer Salon and the opium dens of Victorian Paris. I'm actually none of those things, except for the author. I am an author. And I'm here making a video a month after the fact to announce that my second book, Be Dazzled, is officially published. On my channel, we talk about my books, but we also talk about books in general, and writing, and publishing, and like arts and crafts, and like all this other fun stuff. If you're a writer, or an author, or you just, I don't know, like arts and crafts, like feel free to follow me. And if you've got questions, I try to do Q&As pretty regularly. So today's video is going to be all about Be Dazzled, but also how I got my second book published, because I know a lot of writers and like up and coming authors follow me. So I'll try to do some of like the craft breakdown, but also like the publishing breakdown too, just because I think that could be helpful. And I'm going to be answering questions that you guys submitted to me on Instagram and during the virtual launch. So first I thought it would be helpful to give like a little bit of like a origin story for how this book came to be, so I'll start there. So as many of you guys know, my first book, Reverie, came out in 2019. This was part of a 2-book deal with my publisher, which means that when I sold them Reverie, the manuscript, they were also like, what else you got, kiddo? Now, the inspiration for Be Dazzled came from like an actual, like, my own lived experience. Years ago, I was at my first New York Comic-Con, and if you've never been to a convention, definitely check them out. They are so much fun. Even if you're not like huge into like cosplay or like geekery or any of that stuff, the energy is just like so specific and incredible that I cannot wait until it is safe to sort of like reconvene at conventions, and I'm really looking forward specifically to like the cosplay portion. Anyhow, it was my first time around like mass cosplayers, and it was also my first time cosplaying. Me and my at the time boyfriend had created sort of these like really complex like Hawkman cosplays. And like looking back, they're not that complex. It was just, it was ambitious for like the skill level that we were at. And it was a really sort of like big build for people that were sort of more on like the casual side of cosplay, I would say. And the thing is, like, I was the crafty one of the two of us. And so even though like we did split the work, I did most of it. I really did. And I don't think that's controversial to say. Like, it was done in my apartment. I was the one that was waking up at like sunrise so that I could like prime the things that we were working on, so that by the time I got home from work, we could like actually paint them. Like, I did tons of stuff, and I was so exhausted by the time that we got to the convention that like I walked onto the con floor like half asleep. And now the actual day was great. Like, adrenaline sort of like kept me together, but at the same time I was so stressed out because like things were breaking, and like I could see that other people had done so much like cooler things than we had done, but no one saw that. It was only sort of like me and my perfectionism just like spiraling, while like my then boyfriend was like gloriously taking in all of this like attention and energy. And that dynamic became sort of like the core dynamic of the two boys at the center of Be Dazzled. The other thing is that at New York Comic Con and a lot of comic book conventions, there are like cosplay championships. It's basically like competitive arts and crafts. People who are just at like such a high level of like crafting and like artistry and creation go on stage and get like scored by judges that like really look up close and personal at the work that they've done, and you as like an audience member get to learn all like the super cool things that people do. Like, I remember like one person was wearing like a sort of like a chainmail. I think it was from like Lord of the Rings, and she had like individually built the chainmail. Like each individual ring, she had like woven metal to create actual chainmail. How cool. Anyhow, I became captivated, and I called my agent and I told her I really want to write a rom-com about like two boyfriends that are basically like arguing in the context of like cosplay and arts and crafts. Further, I was like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if they're competing against one another in one of these like cosplay championships? And then I was like, oh, like, wouldn't it be great if they were ex-boyfriends, and like this was the circumstance that they had to figure out like their really like fraught emotional drama and reconcile so that like each of them can achieve something. And like it was through this that Be Dazzled became the plot that it is. Then an editor was introduced in buying Reverie, and they asked like, oh, like what else do you have? Like, what do you have any other books? And I had nothing else fully written, but I did have this idea, and I had told my agent about it. So she was like, oh yeah, like we've got this like really cute like rom-com cosplay arts and crafts competitive like enemies to lover type thing. And the editor loved it. And that's what became my second book, my second book of like a 2-book deal. So the lesson, writers, is that just because you're like focused on a story, and just because like everyone's like you should finish a book, doesn't mean you need to totally disregard those like little like plot bunnies and like other ideas that come to you. You never know when someone's going to like come to you and they're going to be like, I really like what you're working on, but like what else do you have? Because they're looking at sort of like the long-term trajectory of like publishing with you. And if you have these things ready to go and you're able to talk about them, I think it can be really useful. You don't know what doors that'll open for you. I certainly didn't. Anyhow, that's like a really quick summary of how like Bedazzled came to be in terms of like the publishing side of it. However, I will talk a little bit more about like the writing and how I like crafted this crafted the story. Anyhow, so Bedazzled came out on January 5th, and we had a book launch, and me and two of my friends, Phil Stamper and Claribel A. Ortega, who I think I've mentioned before, we had a really fun launch event where we actually did arts and crafts. Like, it wasn't supposed to be a competition, but it did get a little bit competitive, and I did the worst. Which is very ironic. If you haven't seen the launch event, the entire thing is available on Crowdcast for Books of Wonder, which is the bookstore, so I'll put a link down below. And if you were at the event, thank you so much for coming. If you asked questions and we didn't answer them, I'm going to answer them right now. Okay, so the first question is, can you explain the gems on your face? This is very like reptilian. The book's called Bedazzled. I bedazzled my own copy of Bedazzled, so I felt like there was some sort of like expectation, and this is actually not the first time that I've like glued this much stuff to my face. Years ago, I was dressing as a gnome and I glued like moss to my face, and ever since then I've just been like gluing things into my eyebrows for like events and for parties, and usually gemstones, sometimes glitter, sometimes moss. It kind of depends on the theme. Did you shave your eyebrows to get the gems on? No, I used spirit gum. Amber asks, what are you missing most about in-person events? I'm sure being dropped in public isn't on the list. Oh, yes. So Amber was one of the people that was at the Barnes & Noble YA Book Club event for Reverie, which I had like a cabaret performance that involved like having audience participation, and I made people come up from the audience and like do like a showgirl lift, and they dropped me. Oh, I deserved it. It was very funny. I miss events because, at least at my events, I always try to make them like very fun and theatrical. So I've had like drag performers do like sing-alongs, I've had like lip syncs, I've had like posing contests. I miss making people do like funny things at book events, and I also just miss like talking to like readers during like signings and like seeing my friends and like supporting my friends from the audience and like heckling them with like questions. My favorite pastime. I miss all of it. Ugh, I miss all of it. David asks, have you ever been in a competitive situation with your ex? Oh God, so many. I'm a very competitive person, and my ex was also a very competitive person. We are both very competitive people still. Like we used to go to war during like video games and stuff like that too. And to the point that like we had to stop playing certain video games because it just got like too intense. The thing is about me, I always talk a big game, like with like arts and crafts, for instance, and then I always end up being like shown the door by like someone who I never suspected would like usurp me. So I'm very used to getting humbled. But me and my ex, we never competed in cosplay, although we did compete like with one another and like what we could make and what we could create. And that's sort of the thing. I've always been like the better crafter, and so that I will hold on to until I die. And I say all this like not as like revenge or anything like that. Me and my ex we're very good friends now. He's a total sweetheart. There's like no bad blood between us, and our breakup was like pitch perfect, I would say. Very, very adult. And so that's why I feel like I'm able to like talk about it now. And I think the fact that I like wrote a book about it probably helped me process it to a degree. I don't know. So VP has asked, we all know that Luca was inspired by a person, but what about May and Anaya? I do want to say, none of the characters in Bedazzled are like a one-for-one inspo situation. They're all sort of like an amalgam, and so there's no like one-to-one, but I literally am very good friends with someone named May, and they're a very talented illustrator, and so I think that's probably where I got that name. And similarly, Anaya is sort of based on like a few different cosplayers that I know. The main one being my friend Little Sailors, who I'll put a link down below. Incredible cosplayer, super nice, but also just like very like focused and very talented, and something that was super important for me as the author, as I was putting together sort of the side characters that would exist in orbit around Raffi and Luca, is that I wanted to give all the girls like really sort of like active relationships with ambition. Ambition's a huge theme in the book. And so while Raffi, the main character, is really ambitious and trying to like win the championship, he's also losing perspective of like other things that should matter to him because his perfectionism is taking over. But I wanted to show other relationships with ambition. And so yes, while the book is like about Raffi and Luca and their relationship, like ideally you're also watching other people sort of pursue their dreams in other ways that are much less like destructive, if that makes sense. So if like you're reading this and you're like, wow, like all these girls are a bitch, I think you maybe need to look at like how you look at girls that want things and pursue them with like unrelenting resolve. I personally don't think that that is a criteria for villainy. That said, Evie, who's Raffi's mom, is like clearly villainous, but actually that has less to do with like ambition and more to do with like standards, which we could unpack, but we won't do that here. Is there a cosplay you'd like to try from the book? All of them. I wish I had as much talent and time as I would need to sort of like spend on building all of these looks. I've had literal dreams about like building half of these cosplays because I had to know inside and out how you would build them. I won't spoil anything, but the specific one that I think would be really fun to wear is the one with like the claws. Do you know what I'm talking about? These next questions are about writing and craft. Ryan, Bedazzled seemed to be at the other end of the spectrum from your debut, Reverie, and I mean that in a positive way. Which novel really came first? Warm congratulations. I love this question because it's like, which one really came first? So truth be told, Reverie did come first. I started Reverie when I was in high school. Everyone's heard me say this before, but it's a book that I wrote in response to like YA fiction at the time that just didn't have a lot of like queer characters, so I started my own book. And that became Reverie. Bedazzled like wasn't even a thing in my head until I went to this convention, and then I had to write it very soon after that. So Reverie was like fully done by the time I started on Bedazzled, and I wrote Bedazzled in like only a few months because that's as much time as I had. How many drafts did it take to complete Bedazzled? What was the process while writing it? Okay, so I only had like a summer really to like write all of Bedazzled because of the way that like scheduling works in publishing. Reverie, meanwhile, like took like 10 years because that's, you know, I was learning how to write a book while writing it. I couldn't take 10 years with Bedazzled, so I was very diligent about outlining it, and I ended up writing like only like sort of 1-0 draft, just like a really messy draft, and then I turned that into like a much more cleaned up first draft, turned that in. I think we went through developmental edits. One big like developmental edit and then like a few like sort of like smaller tweaks here and there, and that was the book. It was the fastest, easiest process that I can imagine for writing a book. Oh, I don't mean for that to sound like too like braggy. Like no one was more surprised than I was. So I think it was easier for, I don't even want to say easier, I think it was just a different writing experience for a few different reasons. First of all, I had to be very diligent with outlining it, so the book was completely outlined before I even got started on drafting. Second of all, I was writing about something that I was very familiar with. Both the actual like crafting side of things, like the cosplay side of things, like the anime and like all the geekery that goes into it. That's all stuff that's like already within my head. I didn't have to do a ton of research for it. But same with like the like emotional work in the book too, right? Like Raffi and I are really similar. He's sort of like me at a certain point in time. And so it was easy for me to pull that up because I was literally there. Now, of course, like the circumstances are like very different, but when we're talking about emotional stakes, it wasn't as important. I sort of understood like the emotional side of things. And so I could navigate the drama that I was creating with like a lot more ease, if that makes sense. And then the other thing that I had to figure out is that Bedazzled is told in like a now and then sort of structure. And so as we're watching Raffi and Luca progress through this like cosplay competition, we're also jumping back to the past, watching them like meet each other, become boyfriends, and like break up. And the stories are sort of they're interwoven in such a way that they meld together so that the conflicts both reach their climaxes at the same time in the book. And that was very intentional. At some point, if people want, I would be happy to like explain a little bit more about like the writing craft side of it. It's like probably really boring for the rest of you. So let me know in the comments if that's something that you want me to do. This one's from Nicholas, and he asks, are there any plans for TV shows or movies about any of the books mentioned? That I can't say. Oh, someone asked, how do you know Phil and Clarabelle, and how did you all get so close? It's fun watching you interact. Oh, I love Clarabelle and Phil. I met them via Twitter, and they've become some very close friends of mine in like the publishing world. And when I was thinking about what I wanted to do for the Bedazzled launch, I was I was frustrated because I had all of these plans for like in-person events, and of course none of that stuff was going to happen. And so then I was trying to think, how can I make this like fun for people at home? And I knew I could put on a show, but I wanted to make sure that like the people that I was bringing into it were kind of willing to do anything. And Clarabelle and Phil they're very patient with me, and they put up with like a lot of my shit. And so I knew that they would put up with this as well. And then Phil actually had us do a recorded recital for his book launch for As Far As You'll Take Me, which recently came out, and like, I don't know, we should have like our own show. Stay tuned for more on that. So this is from Claudio, and they ask, as authors of young adult and middle grade, how do y'all feel knowing that your ideas and stories are meant to be enjoyed by younger audiences and could potentially shape minds? Honestly, it stresses me out. I guess I'm self-conscious because I don't think of myself as like a shaper of minds. And it worries me like what shape those minds are going to turn out. But at the same time, I don't want to discredit like the actual impact that my books have on people, and especially young people, in part because I write with that in mind. I write thinking about the impact that my words are going to have on those that find them. The best feedback I can get from my writing, and I've had the privilege of getting this feedback now that I have like 2 books out and people will like send me mail and stuff, is that people read my books and then they're inspired to like write something of their own, or they're inspired to create something of their own. I think that's so flattering, especially if it's something like queer, or if it's something that doesn't quite like fit into like the cookie cutter shape of what people think is being expected of them. A lot of times people stop themselves from creating stuff because they don't think that it's wanted or that it's quite right for like this like fictitious audience in their head. And I was that way for years until I finally just started. And I'm very grateful for like the authors and the artists and the luminaries and like just the role models in general that kind of helped me know that it was okay to just like start making stuff on my own terms. And so my goal is to do that for other people. I mean, I hope that's the shape that I'm making. Although, like, what if instead people are just gluing like rhinestones to their faces because of me? That wouldn't be so bad. Look, I think that I'm onto something. And the last question from Catherine is, what book are you writing next? Catherine, I'm so glad you asked. So I got to announce this recently, and my next book is called The Honeys, and it comes out summer 2022, and it's a horror novel. So I did fantasy, I did like a contemporary rom-com, now we're going to horror. Yeah, and that was a 2-book deal too, so there's a 4th book somewhere in here, and couldn't tell you what that's gonna be about yet, but it'll happen. It has to happen. And those are all the questions I'm doing for today. So if I didn't get to your question, feel free to like drop it below. I will try to do more Q&As, but thank you so much for everyone that asked me, that came to the event. Thank you for everyone that's been reading Bedazzled and sending me like your reactions. And if you haven't read Bedazzled, I hope that you do. I hope that you love it. I hope that the story of Raffi and Luca and their friends in this like crazy cosplay rom-com situation is like a total escape from just the nightmare of our daily reality and our struggles, and that you just love it. I hope that you love it. Anyhow, thanks for watching. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, rate, I don't even know, all of that fun stuff, and I will talk to you soon. Mwah! 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 Mwah!